Great. We have reached the appointed hour, and so good afternoon to those of us in the Eastern time zone or further east, and good morning to the rest. It's nice of you all to join us today. We have an exciting HL7 CodeX Community of Practice event to share with you today. I'll spend a couple moments running through what is HL7 CodeX and why do we have these communities of practice. That'll take about 5 minutes or so, and then I'll pass the mic off to our presenters who will be presenting on mCARD, minimum core cardiovascular data. I think what the work that they have been doing and are proposing to do next is very exciting and valuable for our community. And so I'm excited to learn more about it and for you folks to learn more about it as well. So with that, my name is Brian Van Oosten. You can call me BVO, and I'll just run through a quick overview of what is CodeX and what are we doing here. Excuse me. So first off, HL7 is the world's leading standards organization in health data, and HL7 has spawned a number of accelerators. We are but one of the accelerators in the accelerator program. Each of these accelerators is a community that's brought together to solve particular problems in healthcare, and each in their own vertical, and to use digital health standards to help solve those real-world problems. Down in the bottom right corner here, you'll notice that there's a new accelerator called Caliper, which is HL7's new accelerator focused on medical devices. And then I don't think they have a cool logo like the rest of us have yet, or maybe they do and I haven't seen it. Anyway, that's the accelerator program. Within CodeX, we have three domains. We started in the oncology space based on work that was done in mCODE. We then expanded into cardiovascular health and into genomics. And the folks who are going to be speaking today are focused, of course, in that middle domain. And you'll hear about the breadth of their work, but with a focus on the mCARD project. Across HL7 CodeX, there's a number of active projects in these three domains. Again, we're going to be looking in the bottom left corner of this screen in today's presentation, and you'll hear a bit about hypertension management, about CIED, and with a real focus on mCARD. What is CodeX? So CodeX, as I mentioned, is one of the accelerators. We're created by HL7 to address real problems in clinical medicine by assembling a community of stakeholders together to solve these problems using digital health standards. One of the things that makes CodeX special and unique is the breadth and diversity of our membership. So we're not all from clinical delivery organizations. We're not all from big pharma companies. We're not all from middleware software vendors. We represent all of these groups, and all of these groups are represented here. We're very grateful for this diversity of membership from really big companies to little tiny companies who are all passionate about solving problems in this target-rich environment. Our members, the organizations that participate can choose a membership level. I would love to speak with any of you who are perhaps here for the first time, who would like to learn more about what does it mean to become a member of CodeX. That's my job, is to communicate that value to you and to help you through the process of becoming members in CodeX. And finally, what is a community of practice? Well, here's a quick slide overview that shows the overall governance and organizational structure of CodeX. We're led by a steering committee. We have the benefit of an operating committee, which helps shape policies. We're made up of a number of use case teams, and we'll hear from a couple of those today. And together we are enriched by and seek to enrich the broader CodeX community of practice, all the folks who are surrounding this space who are interested in learning more and want to contribute to the work of making health data more interoperable and useful. So that ends my quick overview of CodeX. The community of practice is just one of the things that we do here, and I think today's community of practice event will be a really interesting one. And so I would like now to introduce our speakers. We have three speakers speaking on behalf of the CARDEX and mCARD teams. Dr. John Windle of University of Nebraska Medical Center, Dr. Jimmy Chang of Duke, and Maria Isler of the American Heart Association. And these three are all leaders within the mCARD use case. And so now I will mute my mic and pass the baton to John, and who will be introducing some more about CARDEX. Over to you, John.
Thank you for that great introduction. John Windle here. Jimmy Chang and I have been working together for 25 years trying to work on the issues of interoperability and building real world implementation. At a meeting at the ACC, we happened to run into Chuck Jaffe, and we were talking about DICOM, and we said, how did you get DICOM to work? And he goes, we took really bright people and locked them in a room and wouldn't let them out till they had something to do. And so that's kind of the mantra that Jimmy and I have been moving forward with as we came to CodeX and MITRE with the idea of setting up a new domain for cardiovascular disease. It's a unique structure in that it's an all volunteer organization where everything we build is open source. And the wonderful thing that I've seen about this is you get tremendous buy-in then because people are not competing for their individual solutions. So as we went about this, we decided to start with the hypertension use case because how difficult could it be when there's two numbers, a systolic and diastolic? And I'm going to let Dr. Chang talk about how difficult that is. We then moved into cardiac implantable electronic devices and working with the World Forum for CIED, which brings together electrophysiologists from across the world. And I'll talk about that in more detail. And then we'll finish up, and the majority of time will be spent on our newest endeavor, mCARD. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy.
Terrific, John. Thank you very much. This is Jimmy Chang. I'm an interventional cardiologist at Duke and adjunct professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and the chief data scientist at the Center for Intelligent Healthcare, which John runs. It is out of the Center for Intelligent Healthcare where we house the CARDEX work. And I'm pleased to start off the discussion this afternoon with just a brief update as to where we are with our first use case, and that is the hypertension management IG for the movement of self-measured blood pressure data from from patient to clinician. So as we thought about where should we start in the cardiology domain, one of the things that we all recognized, the clinical community, patients, our key partners that you see here listed, is that we really didn't have good access to data, specifically SMBP data that patients acquired at home in the clinical record. So the opportunity was to automate that exchange and to ask the question, would that actually make a difference? The depiction of what we have been working on as part of CARDEX is shown here, primarily represented by, at the very bottom, by the darker red arrows with a little FHIR icon there. Essentially what we're trying to do is figure out how to use FHIR to move data from patient to the EHR to the clinician's perspective, if you will. That's phase one. And then phase two, our ambitious part of this, is to be able then to do it in a bi-directional way so that you're exchanging information that can then enhance clinical decision support, perhaps even automated clinical decision support that is patient facing. So where are we today? This is a little bit of a detailed view, but the good news is what it represents is we are now in the piloting phase of implementation of SMBP, the the hypertension management FHIR IG. This work started off in the late fall of 2025. You can see that on the left-hand side of the screen where an entity, the Pima County Health Department, with their practice colleagues at the El Rio Health Enterprise, came to us through a connection that we had created in the informatics community and said, we've got a problem. We've outfitted 15,000 plus patients with blood pressure cuff measurement devices, but we can't get the data from the patient to the electronic health record so that the clinicians could act upon it. And our response was, thanks for coming to us. We actually have a solution. And so you see on the left-hand side of this, some of the green dots here are representing the initial work to bring everybody together to say, okay, now what do we need to do? Our current focus in the summer of 2026 is to actually build the connectors, build the FHIR endpoints, make sure end-to-end testing occurs, et cetera, so that sometime in July, we intend to have our first 10 patients doing electronic transmission, and by the end of calendar year 2026, that's this year, our intent is to have all 15,000 plus patients electronically moving their information. We do have larger plans that are represented in the latter half of the summer of 2026 into the blue. Suffice it to say, we think this is a real advance in terms of how do you go from an idea, a concept, technical development to actual implementation. Our depiction of what it is that we are building is listed here. We are building a playbook in a collaborative way so that we can go from 15,000 to hopefully 15 million lives covered sometime in early 2027. So our next steps to continue the work at El Rio, this is the bottom of the screen, to continue our work with El Rio, to move forward with Omron, our partner in this, to move forward with Epic, the EHR partner in these initiatives, to develop one-pagers for the decision makers to say, yeah, this is a way forward. We can actually move this from concept through ideation, through project, through concept, through IG, all the way into implementation. And then to scale this to not just 15,000, but hopefully 15 million or worldwide over the course of the next year or so. So hopefully that gives you an idea of both the excitement that we have as well as the process that we're following. In a similar way, we have been moving forward with CIED, and I want to turn it back over to John to talk about where we are with cardiac implantable electronic devices. John.
Thank you, Jimmy. Again, back to the history that Jimmy and I have together. Over the past 15 years, we've been involved with activities to try to develop standards through the American College of Cardiology and Heart Rhythm Society. And one of the projects in 2016, I wrote a white paper on the integrated health exchange about how to have data transform across. In the background, the major manufacturers of CIED devices, Abbott, Boston Scientific, Biotronic, Medtronic, kept working with us and developed IEEE standards for data. But they did not have a way to get that out into the world. So in 2024, I met with David Slotwiner and Hein Heidbuchel and the World Forum memberships and said, there's a wonderful opportunity to do this through a thing called FHIR. And that started this project now where we are connecting the devices through the system. Next slide. Much like Jimmy presented for hypertension, it's understanding the workflow that goes on. In the upper left-hand corner, there's an implantable pacemaker or defibrillator. There is a remote transceiver that connects it, and that transceiver can then go and interact with the manufacturing cloud. Now, if a patient happens to go into clinics or into an emergency room, their device can be directly integrated or interrogated by a programmer. The issue is that the outcome of this is, by and large PDF files, and average, I would say, of a download is about 50 pages of documents, but none of them are actually actionable. So the whole intent of this is to create data standards to enable FHIR and then allow us to work at the level of data rather than documents. And you can see manufacturer can go to either an EHR or third-party vendor, and then down into the clinical domain. Next slide, please. It is really very interesting with the groups that we have presented. And one of the things that I think becomes important in the whole CodeX FHIR Accelerator is bringing key stakeholders together. And we've been very fortunate and blessed to have all the necessary stakeholders show up and wanting to participate. So even though they're competitors in the marketplace, all the major manufacturers of pacemakers and defibrillators are participating. And when you look at this, and we won't go through all the technical stuff on the right-hand side. So the international standard from IEEE is called IDCO, and it's an information model. And you have to get down into the level of how does this actually work? How does this communicate? And then you get into a lot of jargon that we won't get into today. But the thing is, once you adopt this and you build a FHIR IG around it, you can actually transmit this. So our first use case is that whenever you have a patient who has an implantable device, they may or may not be connected to the transceiver that's necessary to send it to the national or the cloud. And then the manufacturer may know that, but the pacemaker clinic, the CIED, the clinicians will not know whether the patient's connected or not. And this can lead to all sorts of adverse outcomes. So our first use case, STU1, and that's called the standards of trial use for those who are not actively involved in the HL7 approval process, was to simply say, is this device connected or not? And when we looked at this, we built out a standard and had a wonderful collaboration between a technical committee that could do the science, the clinical concepts, the FHIR IG, and the clinical community who kept us on target with this is important. This is the actual workflow that will make a difference. And we did a study of the costs, the estimated costs of the disconnected status. And it turns out that implementation of STU1 will likely save, we estimate, $80,000 per 1,000 patients with implantable devices. There are 10 million implantable devices worldwide. So let's go on to the next slide. So we are now in the process of, we've achieved our Connectathon, we've had STU approval, and the important thing is all manufacturers are committed across the world to participate in this FHIR project. That turns out to be a multi-million-dollar project per each company. But once that's achieved, they're going to reuse it all the time. And that's the beauty of this open source solution. So we are working with a company called Merge. Jimmy and Duke are going to work with Pacemate, and we're going to demonstrate real-world pilots coming up later this summer or early fall. We're also working on our second use case now, and STU2 will be even more exciting, and that's the unscheduled remote transmissions. And we think in the next 2 years, we will have mapped the entire life cycle of pacemakers and defibrillators. I think that's the last slide, Jimmy, and back to you to talk about mCARD.
Thank you very much, John, and great progress with CIED. So what I would like to do is spend more time, most of the time, talking about mCARD. I think you'll see some of the themes that we've tried to develop with hypertension and CIED repeated here at mCARD, particularly bringing together the community, understanding the use case, developing to a destination that helps facilitate the adoption and implementation of the solutions that we're building. But let me start off with thinking about, what is mCARD? mCARD is obviously an acronym. We are borrowing that from mCODE. mCODE, the acronym stands for Minimum Common Oncology Data Elements. Similar to that, we're calling mCARD Minimum Cardiology Data Elements, or Minimum Common Cardiology Data Elements. The context as compares to mCODE, this is a cardiovascular context, and the first thing that we did was to design and write and author a use case that would be leveraging the clinical concepts that we want to express as data elements. The target for this work, it is to literally try to make sure that we create an environment that facilitates semantic interoperability of the key information as it's captured at the point of care in a consistent and discrete manner. And so if you think about that, that means retaining semantic meaning and structure with the concepts as they're developed, as they're specified as developed. And in fact, what we're articulating is a little bit of a different vision than classical informatics. That is data liquidity without data transformation. That is, there should be enough information associated with the representation of that clinical concept as it's captured to support the various potential uses of these clinical concepts. I think this will come, or I hope this will come a little bit more clear as we get to some of the examples, but suffice it to say, this is the embodiment of the capture once, use many times paradigm. Now, the place where we're thinking that mCARD will sit is really in the middle of all the work that happens in the cardiovascular space vis-a-vis the care of the patient with a cardiovascular disorder. We have divided the cardiovascular domain into 6 different subdomains. You see them represented in the colored circles around mCARD. There's a congenital domain, a structural domain, etc. I'm not going to read those to you. Within those domains, there are specific use cases. So we've already talked, for example, about hypertension and CIED. We have on tap several others, including, as you see represented here, aortic stenosis. But the foundational concept is that mCARD sits in the middle. It really doesn't matter where you want to, focus your energy, which domain you want to focus your energy on. There should be a lexicon that helps at least jumpstart that particular domain. Now, we've been actually working on this quite a while. This is a web page from the acc.org, americancology.org website. You're free to go to it. There is actually a page devoted to data standards, and you can see there's not just one publication, there's multiple publications. And the question becomes then, where do you start? Well, there is in the third column of 2011, the electronic health records base vocabulary, base cardiovascular vocabulary document that has been published by ACC and HA that has largely served as the starting point. However, thinking that when it was published back in 2011 to now, that's a lot of time. And so in the mCARD discovery phase, which we have just completed, what we elected to do was first conduct a landscape assessment, determine where we are today vis-a-vis where we were more than a decade and a half ago, to identify, is this still a need? What would that need address? What would that actually look like? Is this paradigm of capture once, use many times still a valid paradigm? Is the need for native interoperability still something that gets that could be leveraged in terms of our IT solutions? We also wanted to make sure that, as opposed to being an academic exercise among a bunch of clinicians, among a bunch of cardiologists, that we actually now took advantage of the new models that were brought forward through CodeX to identify and engage the stakeholder community early rather than later, to implement governance that is consistent with the approaches that we have taken for other CodeX use cases, to again articulate a use case. Our particular use case is a patient care narrative that highlights the clinical need for semantic interoperability by following a patient as they go from elective outpatient to an urgent outpatient setting to an emergency department setting to a patient hospitalization associated with procedures and then longitudinal follow-up. In this discovery phase, we actually identified over 6,000 concepts that have been published in the medical literature over the past decade and a half, 2 decades, that would need to be prioritized and to address the question, how do you identify those key concepts, the core clinical common data concepts, but we didn't want to just start off with the set that we had published back in 2011. We said, we do need to be more expansive. We also said we need tooling. We need to have a way to actually express these concepts in a parsimonious manner. So a little bit of a change to the, I would call, classical informatics-based approach of trying to assign via a binding to a terminology. We said, no, we actually think we can do a little bit better by coming up with a refined, parsimonious metadata model. Tom Windle, not John Windle, Tom Windle and myself created the first one of these based upon the Pew Charitable Trust work that we did back now about 6 or 7 years ago. And we also said we want to expose this to the public through a terminology server. So what terminology servers are out there that would allow this? And I'm happy to announce that we've aligned with the FDA with their COMET technology to put the formalisms and representations and make sure that this is in the public domain. The last thing that we worked on through the discovery phase was to try to figure out, can we do this faster, better, and I would even say cheaper than the traditional way of getting people around a table to say, okay, I think this should be brought forward, or I think that should be brought forward, to saying, okay, let's use artificial intelligence, large language models, and build an agentic graph that would allow us to do this better, faster, and cheaper. So let me go through with you kind of where we are today. So the key artifacts that we've developed so far is the, first of all, notional model. I showed you that notional model in that depiction with the mCARD representation right there in the center. We do have a use case narrative that is posted to Confluence. I'm happy to share that with anybody who's interested in that, but that really is the foundation to say, okay, now where would the transfer of data as semantically interoperable concepts, where would that be important? And again, I can't think of a better one than elective to urgent to emergency department to hospitalization to procedure to longitudinal care. So that's part of the reason why we decided to describe a patient with an acute coronary syndrome. We've gone through a Delphi methodology with a number of about 8 to 10 subject matter experts, clinicians, to whittle down from 6,000 to 145 key concepts. I mentioned before the metadata framework that we've been developing, and I'm going to show you at least several elements of that metadata framework here in just a moment. We've learned really how to use the FDA's COMET terminology management system. And a lot of this, if you will, not all of this, all of this is actually described on the ideation page now on our Confluence site. So let me walk you through a couple of the kind of technical things to hopefully get you excited about what it is that we're doing. There are actually 3 sets of tables that are going to be used to specify every concept. There is a clinical metadata table, there is a database metadata table, and then there's what we're calling, for right now at least, the informatics metadata table. The total number of pieces of metadata is around 30. As you can see, most of this, 16 of those pieces of metadata are in the clinical metadata table. And so there's what we call the raw concept. This is, again, I'll show you this in just a moment with the spreadsheet, but this is a compilation of how a human thinks about the concept. And then the expression of that actually requires the next 4 elements to roll up everything into the raw concept. So there's the concept itself, if you will, just a single description of that. There's a category that would typically fit in. For example, is it a test? Is it a procedure? Is it a element of history? Is it another category of information? Is it laboratory data? The documentation group then divides the category into subcategories, and then the context describes where did you capture that piece of information. Is it the result of a lab test? Is it the result of a procedure, an echocardiogram? Is it something that would be documented in the medical record by a clinician? Who does the documentation is also listed as a piece of metadata, and these are typical individuals. And then we get to things that I think make a bit of sense. What type of data is it? You need to define at the clinical level what that concept is. And then we're not trying to be, and this is number 9, we're not trying to be original about any of this work. So as best we can do, we actually go out to the literature, and we have a corpus of over 300 documents that we're pulling from. Our agentic reg is pulling from over 300 documents to find the best way to describe this in human terms, describe the concept in human terms. And of course, number 10 there is you have to say, okay, now where'd you get it? Where'd you find that particular definition? Number 11 is the concept prompt. In other words, if you were looking at a case report form or computer screen, or you were just trying to answer the question, what question would be asked of you so that you could come up with the answer? I think most, if not all of you, are familiar with value sets, but we actually have several different concepts of value sets. So in the clinical metadata side, it is what is the list of clinically valid values that are appropriate to answer the question. And again, I'll show you that in just a moment. Turns out that those value set list choices also need definitions. There's typically a reference for that. This is not value set authority center. We'll get to that in a bit. But this is really about the value set clinical expression itself. And then where'd you get it? That's line 15. And then obviously we need to have a place to put notes. So I'm going to flip here to a spreadsheet to hopefully will bring forward these concepts to you. So what you see across row 1 here is the list of categories, the list of metadata categories that I had shown you in the slide before. So unfortunately, I'm going to flip back one more time, back to the slide. So you see here, for example, raw concept, category, documentation group. And getting back to the spreadsheet now, raw concept, category, documentation group, context, et cetera, et cetera. What we have decided to do was, out of that 145, take 5 representative terms from scattered across the entirety of it and say, can we use this Chang-Windel metadata model to capture and express what it is that we are trying to describe? So I hope you can read this. I'm going to read it out a bit to you so that if you can't, if you can't quite see it, that you'll get an idea. But the first one is a active problem. The question is about the patient. Did the patient present with a sudden cardiac arrest? The raw clinical concept is that the patient is presenting it with an arrhythmia called sudden cardiac arrest, and the potential answers are yes or not present. The next one is, does the patient have diabetes as a cardiovascular risk factor? The next one is an assessment that we make frequently in clinical care, and that is if a patient comes in with an acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack, what type of myocardial infarction is it? And you see at least a preliminary shorthand version of the various types. We in medicine use quite a few risk scores, so we wanted to represent that as, how would we show this in a metadata model? And so we chose one that's used in atrial fibrillation calculations, the CHADS-VASc score. It's a way to evaluate a patient in terms of their need for anticoagulation in the presence of atrial fibrillation. And then you see down here, the last one is a diagnostic test finding, the aortic valve peak velocity. That's the velocity of the blood shooting across your aortic valve with every contraction of your heart. I'm going to move over to the right. Hopefully the screen keeps going here. There we go. So you see document or role, data type. Again, it's reasonably self-explanatory. And then we get to the meat of this from a clinical perspective. So let me just expand this a little so you can see what we've done. And that is to take a clinical definition from the literature and use that as the concept definition. So it turns out that the best definition that we found for sudden cardiac arrest is from a reference in 1980, and that is the definition that you see here. Similarly, we've gone out to other societies for the definition of diabetes. We've gone to the cardiology literature for the definition of myocardial infarction. And interestingly enough, we have found items where there is no really what we would call adequate single definition. And so we've actually had to compile some things. So I'm expanding this one so you see what the definition of the CHADS-VASc score is, where we have actually ended up using an adaptation from a combination of textbook plus the original reference source for this scoring system to describe this. Moving forward, again, where did we get it from and what's the URL for that? The next column here is the concept prompt. This is, again, if you were looking at this on a computer screen, what would the computer screen ask you? So the question is, does the patient have diabetes mellitus? Notice that we did not include the risk factor concept here because although that's the way it's expressed in cardiovascular registries, it's really the question, does the patient have diabetes? So we tried to make sure that it reflected that. For the types of myocardial infarction, again, let me expand this a little bit. These are the clinical value set list items that you see here. And that's what we are presenting to the clinician, at least in the interface. There are some value sets that the definitions are very complex. So we've elected to put, for example, MI types, the value set definitions in a different tab on this spreadsheet. So type 1 MI, we have indexed, we have a common name expression for what we think of as a type 1 MI, which is an atherosclerotic MI, but there's all kinds of criteria that are important in making that definition. So that's how we are handling that. And then the last part of this is to, again, express value set definitions. So I talked about the types of MI, but here you see we are pulling not just the definition of diabetes into this. Sorry, I need to keep moving here. Not just the definition of diabetes from the ADA, from the American Diabetes Association, but also the types of diabetes as defined again by the American Diabetes Association. Now, the magic of all this, I hope you recognize that this is a fair amount of work, especially for humans to do, but the magic of all this is that by using these first five, and I will ask ask my collaborator, Maria Isler here, when we're finished to comment some more about her work in AI, is that she is figuring out how to use these exemplars as ways in a few-shot paradigm to accelerate the work to pull together these tables of data for the other 140 terms, and then hopefully many, many more terms beyond that, so that we go from a project that's going to nominally take 3 years to finish to something that we hopefully finish sometime in either late this year or early next year. So we're really trying to compress all of that time. Let me return back to the slides. This is, again, this list of clinical metadata. The next one are the database metadata. And if you really think about why do we need database metadata, it's to help database developers create database systems that natively have expressed the concepts that we want to capture and be able to, again, capture once and use many times in a semantically consistent way. The key concept here is that, and this is foundational informatics, is that what we are trying to specify is the name value pair. The name value pair is what's the database field name, and how do you express that particular item in there. The database field value set is not necessarily the same as the clinical value set. And so that's why we have this listed here for a data field value set, a data field value set authority that is either going to be the VSAC itself, the Value Set Authority Center, or where, excuse me, these elements don't exist in the VSAC. Our intent is to build this out via HL7's FHIR terminology services. And because this is admittedly a FHIR-focused initiative, we've included as part of the database metadata the anticipation, here expressed as both listing the FHIR resource path as well as the URL corresponding to that, what we're asking database developers to do is to anticipate that they need to be able to express these concepts that are stored in databases as via their FHIR resources. So with that, let me conclude by saying, or by expressing where we are. We have finished, largely finished the work of the first 5. We do have our clinical metadata table. I showed you that. We have the database metadata table. In the interest of time, I'm not showing you that, but we're happy to do that. Or I'm happy to share that with you offline if necessary, if interested. Maria has been working furiously to refine the agentic RAG tool, that retrieval augmented generation tool that is going to be applied across the 300 source documents. And it turns out it's not just those cardiovascular documents. There are some things that we have to pull from outside of that to accelerate the work that we're doing. We are starting the process to post the specifications in the FDA's Common Terminology Management System. And we are finalizing the for submission. It's not published yet, but the submission of the Chang-Windle metadata model that really describes what it is that we're doing. John and I, several of you might have heard us chatting right as you were getting on here. But, we're working on an abstract to describe this in HIMSS 2027. Please wish us luck that the abstract gets accepted. But that is our kind of first anticipated description in the public domain beyond the work that we express here in the CodeX environment to hopefully encourage and envision the adaptation of the terminologies that we're developing by the larger IT community. So what are our asks? We do need to think about expanding stakeholder engagement. We are also looking for physicians, clinicians, informaticists, IT specialists, database developers, et cetera, to help with the metadata specification, especially the checking of the things that we've put together as content. In the next month or so, we are going to formalize this as an HL7 project through the Clinical Interoperability Council, so that that should get us to development of a FHIR IG. We are targeting Q1 of 2027 for the version 1 of the, or STU1, if you will, of an mCARD FHIR IG. Hopefully that's excited you. As John mentioned in his presentation, there is a business component to this. So we have engaged resources at the University of Nebraska system to help with the mCARD value proposition. I wish I could give you a number right now, but we believe that enter once or capture once, use many times, has an intrinsic value to it. We just need to calculate exactly how much it is. So that is also part of the work that we anticipate completing in calendar year 2027. Last slide is here, and I am right about where I was hoping, wanting to leave 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. But if you are interested in learning more, this deck will be available. It will be distributed by BVO. We have Confluence pages for the CID connectivity use case, the hypertension management use case, and for the mCARD work. It was on a different page here, but suffice it to say, we do have an mCARD page as well. To contact, key contact information is listed in the 2 individuals down there, including myself and Melissa Christian, who is our use case coordinator for CARDEX. So with that, I appreciate the attention that everybody has given me, and we are happy to answer any questions. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Very good. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jimmy, for your excellent presentation and for covering so much ground in an efficient amount of time. So thank you for that. I have put in the chat an invitation to any of our participants to post questions, either in the Q&A or in the chat. We have two questions from our friend Braun Kisler. Others here, of course, are welcome to add their questions to the queue, and I'll pick my favorite questions and pose them to our panel. We can engage in this Q&A for about 10 minutes, and then I will wrap things up as we're approaching the top of the hour. So once again, thank you to our presenters. So Braun has a couple questions about interactions with other groups. Braun asks, how are you coordinating with the HL7 genomics work group? And I'll take a quick stab at that before I ask our panelists to weigh in. Each of our use cases across CodeX, and we showed you earlier in the presentation 10 or 12 of those, each of those use cases has a champion at HL7 among the working groups. And so our HL7 CodeX GenomeX domain has 4 active projects right now. And each one of those has a champion within one of the working groups. I believe the genomics working group is a champion for 2 or maybe 3 of those use cases. And I don't believe, perhaps John and Jimmy can confirm, that the CARDEX folks are working with the HL7 genomics work group. It doesn't seem like that would be a good alignment. Is that fair?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you, Braun, for the questions. The cardiovascular group, the CARDEX group specifically, really doesn't have a genomics domain within cardiovascular medicine, aside from some, I would say, more peripheral use cases. Now, obviously, there are things like amyloid where genomics is important, et cetera, but it is not like the domain of oncology. I would say that within CodeX, there's a tremendous amount of alignment with, for example, the Global Alliance for Genomics and Genomics Health that you mentioned in the queries. Cardiovascular disease, we are, I would say, the opportunities for genomics are there, but we really haven't, aside from a few edge cases, really are not using genomics as nearly as much as other disciplines. So for right now, we're more focused on bread and butter cardiovascular medicine. So atrial fibrillation, pacemakers, valve disease, coronary artery disease, if you will, expressions of disease, where our standard therapies are put a stent in, replace the valve, start the patient on statins, as opposed to the curation of opportunities where there's a direction that needs to be embraced based upon a genomic profile. So hopefully that answers at least the genomics portion of the question. It isn't that we're not interested. We do have on our big map a genomics component, a genomics domain, but it just isn't a prominent feature of cardiovascular medicine right now. You also mentioned ISO. John's presentation on CIDs, for example, I hopefully at least partially addresses the fact that we are really trying to make sure that we are aligned. IEEE is an ISO component, if you will, for lack of a better term. The process, the 15+ year process to develop the base vocabulary that we are now expressing through the CID FHIR work is an IEEE initiative, ISO IEEE initiative. We are not going through and recreating that wheel. We are leveraging other work products as much as possible. And that kind of is the philosophy about everything that we do. John, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
I would amplify on that a little bit in that through our use cases, we are feeding back to ISO some additional terms that will come up in 1.2. So again, fundamental thing that we start off is to not start another set of standards.
Yeah, but this is Braun. Would you mind if I comment on that and just give you some more perspective? So I know CodeX, and then CodeX moved to genomics. So my questions may be broader, across, CodeX and the different projects. But what we do on the ISO subcommittee for genomics informatics is we coordinate very closely with GA for GH. So we compare projects. We can compare projects that are about to be launched, and we do joint development with GA for GH. So we're working on the same standard that is assessed by the GA for GH community and the ISO, what's called participating members, or the ISO nations. So I think it's very important. I presented to CodeX before. I'd like to dig into this. Yeah, I'd like to dig into this a little more. Also, ISO TC 215, where the subcommittee I chair sits under, has a relationship with HL7. So I just feel like we need to leverage all these moving pieces to make sure we're coordinated and heading in a similar direction. There's also an IEEE project and standard that we're looking at to bring into the ISO subcommittee for genomics informatics. So my question's broader than just a cardiovascular, but I'm very happy that you all working on cardiovascular disease. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks,
Thank
Bron.
you.
Other folks are welcome to add their questions either in the chat or in the Q&A. And I will remind folks that a recording of this presentation will be published in the next 24 hours to our Confluence site, so you can share this presentation and its recording with any of your colleagues that you think would find this interesting or useful. I would also welcome any organizations or individuals who want to learn more about membership in CodeX to reach out to me directly. I'll be sure to put my contact information in the chat in a moment. And I can connect you with the use case leaders in each of our use cases if you have questions in one of those particular domains that extends beyond my knowledge, which isn't that hard. Any other folks with questions?
If not, can I?
You can ask another one, Brian. You're welcome to.
Yeah, I'll ask another one. So one of the things we do in the genomics subcommittee is we have a spreadsheet, like with all the GA for GH published standards coming. We do the same thing with ISO genomics and multiomics. We have HL7 down. You have one list of that spreadsheet, but I think we need to also put down the Xcode, mCARD, oncology, cardiovascular projects in that spreadsheet. And then we can all look across that and connect the dots. So maybe I will follow up with you so we get that in the spreadsheet that we look at and we update every 6 months.
Sure. I can speak on behalf of the HL7 CodeX Program Management Office. And Bron, if you'd like to book a few minutes with me, I can run you through the active standards and projects to make sure that your reference list is up to date. And I'd love to share your the index that you've built with our colleagues internally as well. Ken Martin has a question, which Jimmy has already answered. So you're short-circuiting us here. Thank you, Bron. Ken asks, you submitted to ISO some core terms that ISO had not been standardized. And Jimmy, do you want to extend on your answer there?
Yeah, so as simple a concept of, is my CIED available? Is it connected to the cloud-based monitoring that should be happening for most CIED devices? It's like you phone home every night. You lay down in bed and a little Bluetooth-based burst transmission occurs between the bedside monitor and the pacemaker that's inside you, just to check on its health. You know, is the battery okay? Did anything bad occur? That burst transmission doesn't really require much energy, but the statistics are that about 20% of people somehow just are disconnected. There's all kinds of scenarios that we could go through, but suffice it to say, the hardest thing is to figure out not whether you're connected, but whether you're not connected and the statuses of disconnection, et cetera. So as we built the STU1 of the CID use case, there were additional data elements that had to be added, and that's what we're putting through the IEEE IDCO process. I see Craig Reister on the call here. I don't know, Craig, if you want to comment about that. He's a key technical lead on the CID use case.
Sure, I can comment a little bit. Yeah, so that like Dr. Chang said, that so there were some things that were identified as we went through this use case. There was one kind of correction though. The data elements that are directly from the device or related to the device itself, we would add to the IEEE nomenclature. The things that are connectivity are more external to the device, and those are more the system, if you will, and connected to the external from the implanted device perspective. And so those we would not add to the IEEE nomenclature, but those will reside in the FHIR-IG on the HL7
I
side.
assume that's Nomad. Is that what HL7 is using? Or are you looking at more open terminology systems like the NCI Enterprise Vocabulary Services?
Sorry, I don't really follow the question.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, I was just curious about the terminology. So where that terminology sits, is it SNOMED, or is it some other terminology, or is it a mix?
It's not in any of those. It would reside. Right now, it's just in the implementation guide and the FHIR implementation guide.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. So we are at 2 minutes to the hour and would like to make sure that folks can get out of here on time and to their next meetings. So thank you very much to our presenters. Thanks for your preparation and your leadership in this domain. The HL7 CodeX FHIR Accelerator is grateful for all of you as attendees for coming and learning. We would encourage you to share this presentation with anyone in your circles that you think would benefit from learning more. And please do reach out to me if you have any questions about CodeX and how your organization can get involved. My email address is in the chat, and I would encourage you to reach out. And with that, thanks again, and I wish you all a great weekend, and when you get to it next week, a great holiday.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.
Thank you.